Hello, I'm Kads and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about my fusion plan for getting Armanz the Broken, just kidding, Armanz the Magnificent, a hybrid style fusion magic affinity legendary champion. Controversy to say the absolute least. He is a support, but he is very powerful. Some would say, and I tend to agree, a little bit too powerful. If we dive into his kit really quickly, on the A1, attacks one enemy, has a 55% chance of increasing the cooldown of a random skill by 2 turns, and then it can fill his turn meter by 10% for each turn added, i.e. 20% if he increases it by 2, 10% if he increases it by 1. And on the A2 here, which is kind of his bread and butter, but also where he kind of breaks the mold a little bit as far as balancing, is that it's an AoE attack, greatest hits here, 3-turn cooldown, and it will steal all turn meter from every single target, which basically grants him an extra turn, because if every enemy at least has 50% turn meter, or has 25% turn meter for targets in the arena, for example, he will have stolen 100% turn meter, meaning he effectively gets an extra turn. It won't steal it from enemies under sheep, so anyone who's polymorphed, you're not going to permanently keep them as sheep, which would be horrendous. But if that wasn't enough, he also places a stun on them after he steals all of their turn meter. So resets their turn meter, places a stun on them, and so they're basically out of the fight forever. Now, this is certainly where a lot of people are up in arms, because this is most certainly an overpowered broken ability, because you can essentially just keep people controlled perpetually unless you weak hit. It is susceptible to weak hits. If we're going against force affinity or something, you might weak hit and then you don't get any of these effects. But believe it or not, there is some counterplay to the skill. Obviously, Stone Skin, you can't have your turn meter dropped, so that would negate any of his effects. So obviously you also can't be stunned. If you have resistance, high resistance, more than him, more than his accuracy, you just resist the effects and nothing really happens. So you can have high resistance, you could have Stone Skin. You could also use champions like Kadsistency the Rye, who are less susceptible to turn meter drops. I think Rhonda also has a passive that she's less susceptible to turn meter drops. So there is some counterplay. It's not as easy as it would seem, but there are some options in the game. And then interestingly enough, people actually had more of a problem, at least from what I've seen, with the A3 here, which is on a 3-turn cooldown. Really weird booking order here, but a 3-turn cooldown where he can place a sheep on an enemy for 1 turn. So people are not a fan of another polymorphing champion, but honestly I think this is probably helpful. I think polymorph in and of itself, not to go on a tangent here, but polymorph itself is most certainly too strong, particularly because it lasts for 2 turns. And it places it after you take your turn, so your turn meter is reset to 0. But placing it on an enemy who you can choose, in this case you just pick an enemy. It could be UDK, it could be anyone else. It's not forced like Sun Wukong's is, whoever he attacks. I think it's a good thing for the game just to be able to take someone out just for 1 turn, and they preserve their turn meter. So if they were about to go, kind of like a Sify A1 sleep type ability here, but obviously on a cooldown. So you take them out of the fight for a quick turn and they pop back up, and you delete half of their health as well. The sheep debuff cannot be blocked, but it can be resisted, just like polymorph can. And then he also has a 100% chance to remove all buffs from all enemies. So obviously this champion is completely susceptible to polymorph himself via either ability. I guess I forgot to mention that as far as counterplay as well to the A2. If polymorph, if you have a high level of polymorph, when he tries to stun, he's just gonna polymorph himself. Here, when he tried to strip buffs, he can polymorph himself. Also, another counter would be Tormund the Cold, because he's getting a lot of turn meter. So he's getting 4 instances of turn meter steal, which is 4 instances of trying to get frozen by Tormund. So Tormund would absolutely destroy him unless you run him in with some cleansing champion or something like that. And another thing that is kind of busted is his passive here, so that whenever a sheep debuff is removed or expires on an enemy, increase the cooldown of a random active skill on the enemy to its maximum. So that's a warlord, mini warlord type ability. Whenever a sheep debuff runs out, that is the one he places, or it could just be any random polymorph going off on the enemy team. This will also fill his turn meter by 10% for each turn added. So if it adds 4 turns to their ability, it's like a 5-turn cooldown or whatever, he'll get a 40% turn meter. So I forgot to mention the A3 also gives him turn meter for each buff removed, and then obviously this gives him turn meter. So he can take a lot of turns and snowball very quickly if you let him go. And from what I've seen, he can definitely take care of a lot of PvE content, a lot of waves. They become relatively trivial because he can just lock them down, assuming they're not force affinity waves. His aura here is speed in arena battles, which makes sense because he's kind of marketed as mostly an arena champion, even though he's kind of cracked for PvP. And then if we take a look at his base stats over here, HP is pretty decent for a support. I guess it's more on the low side relative to other legendaries. His attack is pretty high for a support champion. I don't think he's a damage dealer by any means, but he has a relatively high attack for a support. Usually you see that around 900 or below. 1100 on the defense as well, 108 on the speed, so pretty quick, and he has the bonus of 20 accuracy when he's ascended. So what are my thoughts on this champion? Obviously, he is extremely good. I go for every fusion regardless, so it wouldn't really matter if he was good or bad, but he's clearly very good, borderline broken, maybe definitely broken, at least in my opinion. If I had my say, I would either change this to a 5-turn cooldown on book to make this a 4-turn cooldown. That way it's not as suppressive and he doesn't lap the enemy team so quickly and get back to it and then just suck the turn meter away from them again, kind of perma-stun, because that's kind of what it does right now, because it's effectively a 2-turn cooldown because you're getting an extra turn once you steal enough turn meter. So I would increase the cooldown on this maybe to 5 turns unbooked, or maybe it'll steal half of the turn meter from each target. I've seen some people throw that around, maybe a quarter, maybe a third or something. So a little bit less powerful, but still you get the effect of kind of a really fast champion manipulating turn meter very well. But I do think that this ability is a little bit too busted. And funny enough, you guys tended to agree, my lovely viewers here. This is a poll on my community tab. It's still open if you want to vote for it, but I basically asked if you guys think that his A2 and or overall kit should be nerfed. And it's only 65 votes, so, you know, small sample size here. But over half of you said yes, or nearly half of you said yes. So the general sentiment right now with the community is definitely that he's overpowered, and I tend to agree, like I said, with that. And so majority of people are saying he should be nerfed. But in fairness, a third of you were saying that, no, he's fine as he is, which I find shocking, but hey, no judgment. That is most certainly your opinion. And then a funny 17% people, you know, about 1 in 5 or so said, just don't add him. We don't want this in the game, more or less. I thought that was an interesting third option to add there. But anyway, let's assume that you all are definitely going to try and go for him. So let's hop over to the spreadsheet and talk about the fusion plan for him. So we have a pretty standard layout for the fusion. As I mentioned at the top, this is a hybrid style fusion, meaning that you don't have to collect rares, but you do have to collect fragments for the epics and then level the epics up to 5-star fully ascended and then fuse those into the legendary himself. For the fusion itself, we do have the standard 4 dungeon split for all the classic dungeons. We have 2 classic arena tournaments. We have 1 champion training tournament going on right now. We have a champ chase, which we don't know, this is unconfirmed, but it should overlap or should coincide with 2x voids. That I think they're going back to the standard rotation of ancient sacreds and voids, and so we would expect 2x voids to be during the champion chase. We have a triple dungeon divers, which you hate to see, triple artifact enhancement, 1 single champion training event, but it's only 4 days long, and then we have the summon rush starting tomorrow, as well as a hero's path, which is going to be a bonus of 50 fragments, 50 epic fragments, and we already know that it's confirmed to be shards, so like a summon rush, and then soul stones as well, so a soul rush if you want to call it that. So you can kind of pick and choose. Getting ahead a little bit of myself as far as strategy is concerned, but you can kind of pick and choose. You can either dive in to the summon rush and the champion chase, because that's a maximum of 50 points from those, or you can kind of wait and bide your time and then go ham on the hero's path, which we know is going to be shards and soul stones. And so you can kind of pick and choose or do half and half, whatever options are up to you. But you have 3 shard events effectively up for grabs, and you can kind of pick how you want to divide your shards between them. Aside from those things, there's not much else that's really worth mentioning, aside from, you know, we have the standard pinch points of champion training overlapping with some dungeon tournament. So in this case, we have the overlap of the champion training tournament here with the dragon tournament ongoing right now, and then a little bit of Ice Golem, and then the champion training event overlaps entirely with Fire Knight and a little bit with Spider. As always, this spreadsheet will be linked in the description box down below if you want to check it out for yourself and kind of track your progress or look at the calendar to see what's going on. And then for those who are less familiar with the format, over here on the right hand side we have all of the milestones for all of the events and tournaments, and if anything is marked with an asterisk, it means that it is a predicted value based on precedent, just from historical precedent based on previous events. And then usually after the fact, or if it has no asterisk, it just means it's the actual number. So for example, the champion training event is 7850. You can see that because it's live in the game. And then after the fact, I usually go in and put things in parentheses in terms of supplies like silver and shard count that I actually spent. So you guys can go back in history and see, like, what did I actually do to get these events, even though I am free to play. So a couple things to note here is that I do expect the higher, more painful dungeon divers milestones here, even though they're 3 days long. 3700 is what those typically are if they're going to be the painful style. He is a very, very strong champion, so I'm expecting kind of the worst, but we'll see if they alleviate some of them in the middle. Artifact enhancement, same thing, expecting the worst. worst, 4775. And then for the Summon Rush, my guess is that it's going to be 4100 for the node, so it's going to be up to 8 sacreds, but we'll talk about that a little bit later because there are some cool events coming up that might make that a lot more palatable to a lot of people if that is the case. Again, that is predicted with an asterisk. And then along the bottom here, we kind of saw it a little bit earlier, but I like to just put in my energy plan. So this is how I plan to use my energy. It's not a guideline for you guys necessarily, but just for transparency of how I plan to spend my energy, or how I will and did spend my energy over the course of the fusion. If we also flip over to this other tab here, we can see that we have the fusion potion calculator, so you know how many potions you're going to want to keep for fusing all the epics and leveling up all the epics. I guess you don't have to fuse any rares, but for leveling up all the epics in this case. So we have 4 void epics, and that's all it is. And so 24 superior voids and then 12 arcanes, and that's all you're going to need for superior. Graders are usually not that hard to come by, but nonetheless, you do need to make sure that you have enough. Maybe if you're more so in the earlier game, you might not have a huge stockpile of those, but so just make sure that you have enough and make sure to pay attention to when the void keep is open if you do need superiors, because the void keep, we all know, is open once a week on Sundays. So you're going to have 2 instances over the course of the fusion to get that done if you don't have all the potions from Ultra Nightmare Clan Boss, for example. Hopping back in the game, let's talk about some of the current events going on right now. We mentioned both of them already that are live, but we do have a champion training tournament as well as a dragon tournament, and they're pretty par for the course. I will say, I think the champion training tournament, the node is a little bit higher than usual. Usually it's in like the 6,000-ish range, probably. I guess 6,350 is probably where it typically is, so it's a little bit higher at the 7,850. But if you do have the resources, and I do encourage you to spend some gems, some energy stores and stuff like that to get all the way out to the legendary tome, it's a 4-day long champion training tournament, and you only have to get 11,000 points. I say only as a tome chaser, but it's 3,000-ish points a day on average. You can see I've already done like 2,500, so I'm well on my way to get there. And so if you're averaging about 3,000-ish points a day, you should be able to get yourself a legendary tome, which is probably worth it on top of getting a champion or legendary champion. So it's 1 book towards the amount of books that he requires. And then the dragon tournament is pretty par for the course. 2,250 is what we expect across the board for all dungeon tournaments, and so nothing different there. When it comes to the events, though, we already talked about the artifact enhancement. I do expect that to be the 4775, which costs somewhere between 20 and 25 million silver, depending on how you go about it. But the Summon Rush is what I really want to focus on, because we have a lot of crazy events coming up over the weekend, starting tomorrow. So we're going to have the first ever back-to-back like double pogo event ever. So like Friday to Saturday and a half is going to be a pogo for ancient shards, meaning pull 1 get 1, bonus legendary 1+1, whatever you want to call it. I prefer pogo. And then the other half of Saturday into Sunday, or the entirety of Sunday, is going to be a pogo for sacred shards. And on top of that is also the progressive chance event for a bunch of revivers. You have Duchess, you have like Elva Autumnborn and Pythia and Mighty Uko. So a lot of really good reviver legendaries on top of the pogos for either type of shard. So depending on how close you are to Mercy can kind of dictate which of the types of shards you're going to pull. Obviously, sacreds are going to be a lot more powerful in a Summon Rush compared to ancient shards, but you can just pull ancient shards if you're near Mercy, and then you're just participating in the pogo event. You might get a Duchess or whatever out of it, and then you're also contributing somewhat to offset how many sacreds you're going to have to pull to kind of make up the gap, because we all know ancient shards are very, very weak in terms of Summon Rush. So there's a lot of exciting things coming up this weekend, depending on how close you are to Mercy or how many shards you have stockpiled and or saved. And as far as our supply count goes, I do like to track this for you guys so you know where I start and where I end when it comes to fusions, because as a free-to-play player, it can somewhat be daunting to participate in fusions, but like I said, I do all of them, and so I like to highlight exactly what I do to get a fusion done so that it doesn't feel as daunting to you guys if you're coming up progressing in the game. So we're sitting at a poor amount of 15 million silver, so we're gonna have to be working and earning silver and spending it as we go along. And so there are some strategies to minimize the amount of cost in an artifact enhancement. And then we have 4,100 on the gems, which we're probably going to dip into, particularly for this champion training event going on right now, but most certainly for the champion training event, that latter pinch point. So we'll see where those supplies come in at the end. So yeah, that's going to do it for the fusion plan for Armanz the Magnificent. Let me know in the comment section down below if you guys are going to be going for this fusion, if you think he should be nerfed, and most importantly, let me know if you want them to nerf him after he comes out, because at this point it's a little bit too late to nerf him before he comes out because it's in the game now. So are you still in favor of a nerf even though you have already begun to try and acquire him? Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below and feel free to subscribe to the channel if you are enjoying the content. Thanks for watching and have a good one.